all been great at coming in on time. I'm going to kick off the first session of the afternoon, which, as you will have seen, is all about collaborative learning. And if that's not what you're here to learn about, then you're in the wrong room. For those of you I haven't already met, I'm Cathy Morris. I work for Impactissima. Been doing this sharing malarkey for a few years now. Well, since the year dot, actually, since learning technology started. And this year, I think it's a bumper year. I got more people than we've ever seen before, so that's absolutely fantastic. So thanks all of you for attending. We've got a super session coming up. A lot of you will have heard this morning about various things that are going on in the learning world and how that landscape is rapidly changing. And one of the things that has been mentioned, I know, in more than one session, is the whole concept of social collaboration and collaborative learning. So we've got two great speakers here today to help us understand how we can use technology more effectively in that mix and getting people to collaborate better at work and learn from each other. So probably needs no introduction, but we've got Jane Hart here, who many of you will have seen speak before and know that she's a real guru on this stuff. But Jane is from the Centre of Learning and Performance Technologies. And we've also got Cathy Hoy, who's sitting down here, who is a Learning and Development Manager for Coca-Cola. And both in her current organisation, but also in past organisations that she's worked for, she's got some great experience of trying to make this stuff actually happen. And so she'll be sharing with you some of her experiences and things to watch out for, really. And that's always really useful and interesting to hear when we're trying to try these things out. So the way the session will work is Jane will give us a little bit of an insight to her knowledge and expertise and experience. Cathy will follow with her story, and then we'll have a good half hour or so of really some interactive Q&A driven by the two ladies, some questions that they want you to discuss amongst yourselves and then share back what's going to be useful, as well as an opportunity then to ask them questions about what you've heard and perhaps some of the things you've discussed. And hopefully everyone will get some really rewarding knowledge and insight out of the session. So I'm not going to waste any more time blarting away. I'm going to hand over to Jane and enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Cathy, for the introduction. And I've got 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to blast through this really quickly. So please excuse. The slides are going to be available at the end, so you can, and some notes, I'll give you the link to that, so you haven't got to memorize everything I say. For those of you who don't know me, as Cathy said, probably my best known place is the Centre for Learning and Performance Technologies, the website, but I'm pretty much online in all kinds of channels. Twitter for me is probably my favourite place to be, so if you haven't already connected with me there, please do so. I've written a couple of books about this kind of subject, and the latest one's called Modern Workplace Learning, and I've put a few flyers on the table there if you're interested in finding out more. But I'll give you some more links at the end about it. Okay, so the topic of my part is 10 ways to use an enterprise social network for social learning. So first of all, I guess most people have some sort of enterprise social network in their organisation. Perhaps you put up your hand if you've got one in there, like Jive or Yammer or Socialcast or something like that. Yeah, so most of you have got one. And I guess many of you will say, well, you've got one, but not many people are using it very effectively. So that may be the case. And I think you as L&D people have a good role to play in helping it be used. I'm here to tell you that you don't actually need another social learning system. You can use this one very nicely for social learning in your organisation. And I think you have, as I said, a great part to play in inspiring and encouraging social learning as it's happening in the workplace and building adoption of the enterprise social network as you go. Because the other thing that's really good about the platform itself is it's the same platform that people are going to be using for the work. So where learning is work and work is learning, we don't actually need separate technologies anymore. We're going to be using the same ones that I'll be using for working. So it's not about content delivery and testing people. It's about inspiring them to share resources, their knowledge, to converse with one another, discuss, in order to support and improve their jobs as they work. But I think it's going to mean new roles as well for L&D people. It's not going to be about being a trainer anymore. And so as I go through these 10 different ways, I just wanted to highlight some of the roles I think we're going to be seeing as we use these tools in different ways. And I wanted to start at first one with clearly the place where enterprise social networks have the biggest part to play is support what I call social collaboration in work teams. And for me, that's where the real social learning takes place, as people work together, learn together, almost unconsciously from one another. It's not necessarily something they go out deliberately to do. It happens as a consequence of working together and sharing what they know with one another. And I think the role here of somebody is about supporting and encourage that, particularly working with managers to build those social teams and help them to work effectively in these new ways, sharing resources and working out loud. So it's not going to be about training people to use the enterprise social network to do this stuff. It's about helping them to use it as part of their work. And that will mean getting really into the weeds with the teams themselves to help them to do that. So there is a big difference in the work that will be required to support teams in this way. But I think there's a big, real advantage here and a real opportunity to get out and start helping people with the real social learning, which is, as I say, happening in the teams. And of course, in a similar sort of way, the Enterprise Social Network is a great place to host your social online communities. And by that, the difference I'm making here is that these are probably cross-organizational teams. So they're not teams that perhaps have a line manager. They're people working across the teams. And so L&D may well have a role in helping to bring people together to improve their work and professional practices, maybe take on the role of community manager as well, and plan and set up and even launch those communities of practice. But that's not where it stops. The big work comes in keeping that engagement going. So I hear about people who say, right, we're going to do a community of practice and we've set one up and that's it. They've forgotten about it. They tick the box, they're on to the next thing. Being a community manager takes a lot of time and effort, and I run communities, particularly ones around my book and talking about modern workplace learning, and it takes daily time for me to work with these people and inspire them and try and encourage the conversation. So being a community manager is quite a new and different role, but it means working in very different ways from training people. And one particular type of community that I'm seeing happen in organisation is one that's being used particularly for social onboarding. I use that American term here, induction probably is what we'd call it. And somebody particularly taking on the role of an onboarding community manager. And what they can then do is help new hires coming into the organisation understand what it is to work in a social organisation. So they're not there to teach, good presentations on vision and mission and values and all the rest of it. They're there to build that social ethos so that when those people move off into their work teams, they're ready to start working socially with one another. So it means working bottom up with these people, helping them to really understand what it means to work in a social business and social organisation. And part of that role might even be about beginning to support the whole concept of social mentoring in the organisation. Many of you probably have a formal mentoring program where you bring people together and you manage the mentoring process and you keep track of it and all the rest of it. With social mentoring, this is very much about facilitating connections between one another, letting people choose for themselves who they want to mentor and who they want to be mentored by for either short or long-term projects. So the role is much more about a coordinator of that, perhaps for giving advice on what mentoring is like, but not actually managing the whole process, just enabling and facilitating it. So that's quite a new role, but can be started with onboarding and perhaps can take place in a sort of special group within your enterprise social network. So those are some ways that perhaps to get things going. Sometimes teams require a little bit of more of a kickstart to get them working together. So I want to give you some ideas of some of the ways that you can take perhaps a little more structured approach to supporting social learning and explain how I've been doing that myself. I think many people see the Enterprise Social Network maybe as a place to host a community, around a learning community around a course. But for me, when I've seen that happening, you've got the course here and the community over here, it never really works very well. So the way I try to do it is to use the group in Enterprise Social Network, Yammer in my case, to drive the whole thing. And then it's not about delivering content at people and making them answer questions. It's very much about creating activities that allow them to do things on their own and share with one another, or work collaboratively if they're in the same time zone or region or whatever it is. It's also about helping them get confidence in sharing and talking about things out loud, because that's often something that they're not very happy to do at first. So it's to build many of the sort of underlying skills using the same approaches and tools and technologies that they will have back in the workplace. And I run sort of 4-week sessions that are very much in this way, and help people focus on perhaps topics, but the whole idea is to get them familiar and happy with using social platforms to share and to make connections with one another. And one of the very specific ways that this could be done is through using the Enterprise Social Network to host what you might call a learning challenge or a learning campaign. So rather than have a whole one-day course or a great big package of resources, you kind of release them over time. So this could be short kind of campaigns or challenges. And seeing this happen quite a bit now. Now, I see Brian sitting in the audience there. He ran a session earlier this morning, I don't know if you were there, and he talked about his 30-day #BeMore challenge, and where he used the Enterprise Social Network they had to inspire people to become more involved with its use. And I think it turned out to be a very great success. So he's the person to ask if you want to see if it really works. I'm currently running a 15-week L&D challenge, exactly using this every week, an activity to inspire people to think about their own personal learning and share. And Gillian, she's on it. She's just started on it, so she can tell you a bit more how that's working. And I've seen it being used for like 6-month leadership development challenges. Gradually introduce activities that develop people over time. But the focus again is on sharing, supporting one another, conversations, not about the content delivery. It's there to support, but not to drive the whole activity. So this means perhaps instructional design needs to look slightly different at this kind of process, and it certainly needs someone there who takes on the role of some sort of guide. I see myself as a guide in these processes. I'm there to help people, encourage participation. I'm not there to force or enforce participation. It's something people need to take time to feel comfortable with. So it's a very different role in this case. And the 7th one it's a similar one, but it's about short activities, drip feeding small pieces of content or activities over time. These are great, could be used for post-training, but they're great for teams that don't have time to go off and do stuff in a classroom or wherever. And it works very much like Twitter, of course, perhaps a daily tip or a daily resource to look at. And great for the role of a curator, finding the good stuff out there and sharing it in a very sort of structured way, perhaps injected into a team space for somebody like a marketing team or the leadership team, just providing that input where they perhaps haven't got time to go out and find all this stuff themselves. But beginning to see more of this happening now, so it could actually take place in a group of its own, or it could happen within the work team. This is how you can get some input into work teams without having to take them out into the classroom. And number 8, of course, it can play a role in supporting classroom training as well. Again, it can be used not only for a collaborative approach to classroom training, it can be useful for supporting that flipped classroom mode where you can put all the content delivery outside of the classroom and just use that for the activities. And it can support therefore in-training, in the form of back channel, and post-training, supporting people as they go back into the jobs. And then that group may just fade away, or it may turn itself into a community of practice where these people want to come together, they want to support one another ongoing. Cathy is going to be talking more about that particular aspect in a minute. So I come to number 9 now, And again, that takes it on again. You can use it very easily to support a live event. You maybe have a webinar or something else that's taking place. And once again, think Twitter back channel. The Twitter back channel is happening here, supporting this event, giving discussions, allowing people to say what they think, not just the so-called expert on the stage. Everybody can have a say in what's going on. So why not do the same thing? Use your enterprise social network to create that back channel for any events that you create. Or even a Twitter live chat. How many people have been on Twitter chats where you're real-time discussion on Twitter? And you can do the same with your enterprise social network. Set up some questions, have some discussion in real time. Again, perhaps in a small, discrete group, or part of a work teams group where you're going to take them through a discussion on some aspect of their work. And then that, of course, leaves me for the last one. And this is where I'm seeing people really use their enterprise social network to create a learning network. Not a separate system on top of what they've already got, but part of what they've already got. A way to kind of stimulate learning through all kinds of ways, not just sort of work-related topics, personal, people's passions and projects, anything where they come together. They might talk about it in a hot seat on the enterprise social network, and they might do a webinar and it's used as a back channel. All kinds of ways. And L&D's role here is very much a coordinator, not necessarily has to produce everything, create everything for it, but just brings people together who want to share what they're doing. And of course, by doing so, fostering connections across the organization. So this bit here is what we talk about all the time, but you can do these in subtle ways using the system. It's not something that you have to sort of really think about in a very top-down way. Just do it in quiet ways. So there we are. 10 quick ways, and I could spend a whole session on each of those, as you can imagine. But the whole point is here we need to think differently, how we can use the system to support and embed social learning in the organization. Now, as I said, if you want to see these slide notes and the things I've just talked about and the slides themselves, they're on SlideShare, and I wrote a blog post this morning so you can go on and recap exactly what I've said. So, done a lot of the work for you. And just one bit of plug for me. If you're interested to read any more, then, as I say, the book is all in there. If you're interested in participating in my activities, you can find more about there. And please, if you're not connected with me on Twitter, please feel free to email me at any time. Thanks. Over to you, Cathy.
Thank you very much, Jane. Okay, some very useful tips there. So Cathy, over to you.
So yeah, as I was saying, so I work for Coca-Cola Enterprises. They are one of the largest bottlers and distributors for Coca-Cola products across Europe. And I was downstairs in the exhibition bit earlier this morning, and somebody said to me, "Oh, will you be sharing the secret recipe?" I won't be. They don't trust me with that, I'm afraid. I've only really been with Coca-Cola Enterprises or CCE, that's quicker, for about 9-10 months. So I look after learning design solutions for the commercial function within the business. So predominantly sales and marketing and sort of field sales. But prior to that, I spent 3.5 years at Tesco, actually, in a global L&D role there, where I got a lot of experience of using Enterprise Social Network. In fact, they used Yammer, and obviously I've had experience with other tools since, but that's probably where I got most of my learning, I guess, which I was going to share with you today. So I guess firstly, what I'd like to talk about really is if you think about learning as, I suppose, almost like a journey rather than sort of standalone elements. So if you think about all the different sort of parts you want people to engage in, so you might have face-to-face sessions, you might have e-learning, there might be an element of mobile learning, even podcasts, blogs you want people to read. What I found actually is that an ESN is really helpful in kind of almost connecting all those pieces together, so it does become like a journey. It's sort of the thread that holds everything together if you use it properly. And I suppose my experience of using an ESN mostly previously has been around how you can, I suppose, improve the experience of face-to-face learning. At the moment in CCE, we probably use them more for communities of practice. We're looking at what we can do in the future with them around onboarding and also learning and development. But at Tesco, we use them probably predominantly for making that face-to-face classroom session more engaging and connecting the dots. Thinking about kind of features as well before I talk about this. If I were to look at, because I know not all of you raised your hands earlier when Jane asked if you had an ESN already. If I didn't already and I was looking at one, I think there are some key things I'd kind of look for. One would be a familiar interface. I think people most of the time now in their social life are used to using things like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. So if you can get one with an interface that looks fairly familiar and intuitive to use, then that's going to save you time. Also, collaborative features. So the more collaborative features, the better, in my mind. So if you've got things, an ESN where you can host, set polls and quizzes and surveys, maybe even live chat, which Jane was referencing earlier, then that's all fantastic as well. I think it would also need to be, again, on my sort of top list of things, you'd want it to be accessible on a mobile device. I've probably done most of my interaction on an ESN actually whilst I'm going from one meeting to another or queuing for coffee at Costa or something. So actually, if it can be on a mobile device, then I think that's ideal as well. And lastly, for me particularly, access for external email addresses. So we previously at Tesco ran leadership development programs, a lot of which we worked with some professional external training providers. It was great to be able to give them access to our groups and our networks, and not all ESNs will allow you to do that. So if that's something that's key for you, it's worth considering. So anyway, enough about features. So thinking about the classroom training and that kind of journey and how to engage people more in classroom training. If we think about learner state, so obviously there is a kind of optimum state for people to be in for learning. And actually I was listening earlier to Deborah, who was in here. I don't know if anyone else caught it. It was a fantastic session actually. And she talked a lot about, people being anxious before turning up to a training session. And I've spent, copious amounts of time and energy phoning delegates before training sessions, a couple of weeks before. Have you got any questions? Are there any concerns? Let me talk you through the agenda. Let's set expectations. And that all really takes time and effort. So if you can you set up a group within an ESN and invite people that are going to be in that training session to that group, they can start to kind of meet each other virtually online. They can find out a little bit about each other. Usually an ESN has got an ability to have a profile where you can update your kind of avatar. You can put a little bit about your skills, background, experience. So delegates get to kind of find out a little bit about each other. Also, you can ask them questions. They can share any of their questions about the course. I've used it once almost as a bit of an icebreaker, really, to kind of ask the group, so what's your experience in X, Y, and Z, and let them share it among them. And the great thing actually about having a group and people asking questions is that when you answer the question or someone else answers a question, the whole group benefit at once. So it's worth looking at. I'd say from an L&D perspective, though, it's something you need to consider from the very beginning. So when you're designing your program or your course or your learning journey, you really need to think about how you want people to interact with that ESN. So how are you going to involve that within your learning design? So it's good to think about it up front. Secondly, keeping cohort groups together. So that's a challenge in itself. So it's brilliant when you run some of these sessions that last maybe over, 6 months, maybe even a year, where people meet up, once a month and they attend another session. But that commitment to getting people to stay together in between the sessions is quite difficult because understandably, people have day jobs and other things get in the way. By having that group and connecting people on the group and potentially for a trainer to set them challenges, activities, things to do in the meantime, then you're kind of keeping that learning a little bit more continuous rather than every time they leave the classroom, the spike kind of goes down and then it spikes up again for another classroom session. So it's great for keeping cohort groups together. Also, what we found at Tesco a lot, because of a lot of our leadership development sessions were run for people from, over 12 different countries often. It's not as easy to just say, we'll grab a coffee every week and we'll catch up and we'll share what we're doing. It's just not logistically possible. So this does give you another way to do that. People can start to sort of share their evidence of what they've learned or put learning into practice, share it with one another, with their peers. It just helps them to keep in touch. between the courses. And then lastly, embedding learning. So thinking about, I think the challenge here is really when people leave a classroom environment, they tend to feel that they've left the learning environment as well. And that needn't really be the case. What we want is to keep the learning going. So keeping it continuous, keeping it ongoing. And again, you know, an ESN group can really help with that. So people can still share what they're learning after a course. I think one of the things I found quite incredible actually at Tesco with one particular leadership programme, and I'd like to say this was deliberate and we, you know, put a lot of effort into making this happen. But actually I think it was more a case of people were used to using the ESN by this point and they felt comfortable using it. But a couple of weeks, even a couple of months after the programme had ended, people were doing their own research on a particular topic and sharing it with the rest of the group because they just thought their peers might appreciate it. And that was really interesting because it's almost as if we'd created a training program alumni by accident, but people just kept in touch and so the learning kept going. I think it's also a great opportunity for people when you leave a formal learning environment like classroom training. You know, we always say as trainers, we'll make sure, you know, you take time to reflect on what you've learnt, talk to your manager, you know, then when you've reflected on it, make sure you share it with others. And everyone sort of goes, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. And then they leave the training environment and it doesn't really happen. And again, it's you know, day jobs, it's time. It's people thinking that, you know, it's going to take them a lot of time to do that. This just makes it easier and quicker and more accessible for people to do. So I also pulled together just what I thought were a few of my biggest learnings, I suppose. And this, really, the reason I've learnt these things is because I've either done it wrong or seen it done wrong. And so you tend to get an idea of what might work. So community management, I think, is the most important thing. So all of those things that Jane was talking about earlier, each of those 10 topics, they're really, really absolutely spot on. And all of those things can work really effectively. But you do need to put the effort in. You know, it's really easy to sort of say, right, that's it, we're launching an ESN, we're going to implement Yammer. So by next week, we'll have a completely different culture in the business. Everyone will be working collaboratively, we'll be really innovative, people are just going to interact on this group, and they're going to share ideas, and it's going to be amazing. And it takes a really lot of time and effort to get people to do that, actually. It doesn't just happen by mistake. So you do need to think about, you know, what you're going to use that group for or that network, how you're going to interact, and how you are going to entice people into it so they can start sharing and asking questions and collaborating as well. So it is a job in itself. It doesn't need to necessarily be one person's role. You can use champions to help you do that. So there's always some people that are really keen to use an open network and to help share ideas. So there'll be people that you can find to help. Leadership support, again, that's really key for me personally. I think you need, particularly the senior leadership team, you really need their buy-in and their support for using the ESN and the organisation generally, but also from a learning perspective. So generally with leadership, I think it might come down to sort of two things. If there's any resistance, it might be skill or it might be will. If it's will, that might be a larger discussion around culture of the organisation. It might be that senior leaders are feeling that they might be being exposed if they comment on an open network. So that's probably a larger discussion than one for today. But the other is skill. So the skill thing is interesting, and whilst you can run training on how to use, you know, a particular network, you know, the button pushing side of things, there's something else that you can try, and that's reverse mentoring. And I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced that yet. A few nods. Was it successful? Yeah. We tried an initiative at Tesco and basically pairing kind of graduates with senior directors in the business. It's an awesome idea, really. And you know, the senior directors got some great help in understanding not just how to use our ESN, which was Yammer at the time, but also just generally, you know, online communities. So they were learning about, you know, Facebook and Twitter and how to find pictures of cats in dresses and, you know, all that sort of stuff, but also understanding, you know, how to blog and what it means to have a kind of social profile, and that was fantastic. And obviously, on the other hand, these graduates had this amazing opportunity by some of our very senior leaders in the business to get some proper business mentoring, so it was a really good pairing. Trust, I think, is another thing. I think that's really important. Probably comes down to the culture in an organisation, really. So are your employees trusted to kind of communicate out loud? Are they trusted to challenge? Is there a massive rule book of policies and procedures that you want to implement if you're going to be embedding an ESN? I would say keep it light. People these days, I think, know how to interact with social networks, and the next generation have kind of grown up with them. So I don't think you should go too heavy on policies and procedures either. And lastly, which probably sounds obvious but is often overlooked, is having a clear objective. So actually making sure you have a purpose and you know why you want to use the ESN, particularly within training. And don't just do it because, you've heard, I don't know, some people at Learning Technologies talking about it and saying it's a good idea. You should, but it is. But you should understand sort of for yourself why it is you're doing it and what you want to achieve from doing that, really. So those are my kind of learnings, I guess, from experience. Much like Jane, around later if anyone wants to ask any questions. But we thought, in the spirit of sharing learning, that we'd actually get you to sort of share some of your experiences as well, if that's okay. So we've got some questions. And what we thought we'd do is get maybe for you guys in sort of your tables and your groups to just decide which of those questions, it might be one, it might be two, that you want to tackle. And then we'll sort of give you, I think, maybe 10 minutes or so. 10 minutes to have a think about those, and then if maybe someone in the group wants to make some notes, then we'll just ask you to share those with the rest of the room, if that's all right.
And there will be, obviously, while you're doing that, Cathy and Jane will walk amongst you. So if you've got some questions on any of this that you think they might be able to help you with in your discussion, then feel free to ask them as you go. And then we'll come back after that, and once we've done a bit of sharing, there will be a short opportunity for you to just ask any open questions to either of the two of them, if there's something still burning in your mind at the time. So pick your questions, either pair up or do it as a table, decide how you'd like to do it, manage yourselves, and just see if you can generate a little bit of discussion about what's working for you out there or what your questions are. And if you have questions, write them down.
Right, okay. We would like, if possible, in the time that's left, to try and get something from every table. So if you can keep your questions or your responses as concise as possible, that would be great. Can't promise we'll get you there, because I do have to make a commitment to Don that as chair I let people out on time. So, but I think it would be nice, definitely. Well, we could try with putting hands up and get those who are really keen first of all, and then see where we go from there. So anybody got something really great that they want to share with the rest of the room that came out of your conversation? Or a good question to ask, Jane or Cathy? So you've all been talking furiously.
Hello, yeah. So we were talking a little bit around different levels of resistance within the business, and we were kind of saying we felt the challenge with regards to resistance to adoption within the workplace isn't necessarily at your leadership and your kind of senior level. It's more at your your kind of the example we were thinking with engineers and technicians or retail colleagues. So from another retailer to an ex-retailer, what was the challenges that you found in engaging your retail population in using social learning? Or did it work?
Actually, actually with the retail population took to it quite well. So sort of store managers specifically, they were really keen to kind of share things that they were doing in store, promotions, things that were working really well. I think possibly it might have got a bit flooded. I'm not sure how many people were really actually interacting with posts and things. It felt sort of more one way maybe at times. So yeah, I mean, within retail, I think they were quite kind of keen to do that, actually. I think some reservations might have been in other areas of the business, and I think that's because maybe they were apprehensive. Was this actually going to be giving them something different, or was it just, you know, another tool to log into? So I think, you know, it was really key for us to make sure that we'd either, you know, connected it to an existing process or procedure that it just made life easier for people, or it was doing something completely new. But from retail, we actually didn't have much resistance, actually.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Can I just add a bit to that I think it's important to people understand the purpose, what you're trying to achieve, and it fits into their working life. If you're trying to make this something extra to their working life, they don't take to it. If you can help them see the purpose, it's going to help them with their jobs, improve or support their jobs, then they understand it. And a very important point, which I was having discussion with you about, is really it starts with you people. If you can show the value it brings for you and your own jobs and your own L&D team, then you've got something to show to other people. It's about saying, you get on with it, but we're not doing it, which happens. It doesn't work. It's got to come from within, which is why people like Brian started with his own team. That's where you start first, building an understanding of how it works. And you learn for yourself. You make mistakes yourself, don't you? And then you're ready to go and support the rest of the team. So that's where you go. And you can't help make people do these things unless they really see a value or purpose in it.
Not too surprisingly, we also talked about resistance. And the challenges that we had around, you know, picking up some of your points, around the clarity of objectives and how areas can start becoming confused. And you used the word flooded there, which is a kind of good term for my experience of it, that it very quickly became like an unmanaged internet site that just had 600 groups which were all doing different things and weren't really too connected. And the other thrust of our conversation was about trust. And there was a two-way trust from the difference people were feeling when they sat in a private group versus when they were in a public group, and not trusting that what they were saying wasn't being vetted by senior managers. So kind of breaking down some of the barriers to allow people to feel that it's a safe environment for them to share some of their concerns.
Can I say something about the numbers of groups and things? I think this is inevitable. You know, any new thing, either people do wild things with it or they don't do anything at all. It's an embedding process. It takes time. You've got to let people to play around and do stuff, and then it'll just sort of like happen normally. People will just really use it for what they want. You just got to be free, let them go free.
But there's something about how you were free to get to that point, but
then help to bring it back again, yeah.
Yeah, because it became so messy that, as I said, comparing to an internet site, it just became out of date and irrelevant in certain places.
I think
it's tough to navigate around. So
yeah, a lot of the sorry to talk over you. A lot of the systems, groups will die naturally, and they'll disappear. There's no activity in them, and I think really that's kind of what a feature that most of them have nowadays anyway. So, if somebody sets something up, just for 10 minutes or a week or whatever it is, and it's not used, it'll die eventually. So it's not about trying to flog this stuff to death on one stage. It's not about getting rid of it too much. It tends to archive itself after a time. And the really good stuff rises to the top again. If you've got Yammer, you can see the active groups, they're always at the top. So, but all these platforms are sort of developing still, I think. We're in the early days of all of this stuff, and we're all working together trying to make sense of it all. So there are no easy answers for all this. It's the answer that suits your organisation the best is the right answer.
So I used to work with Cathy at Tesco, so I've got another sort of example from retail. And my favourite example about people using ESNs was when I went out into the store as part of my induction. I met a lady who'd just taken over running the petrol station. And she'd not really been given any formal induction, so what she did is she went on to the petrol station Yammer group and basically inducted herself through that. She just asked questions to people. So sometimes people will have the nous and the self-initiative to actually drive it forward themselves and get something from it. And I just think that's great because there was no L&D involvement in any of that process. Probably should have been, but wasn't.
All gets down to the motivation of the learner, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
Can I just say something to that as well? Sorry, I've got to talk a lot here. Self-organised groups are actually the best ones because they have a reason to come together. It's the L&D groups that don't work so well because they've been forced on people. But so support a group to do it for themselves rather than, voice a group upon people.
I think you make a really good point, Jane. And hi, sorry,
Yeah.
it's Gemma from BP. I think you make a really good point in terms of not forcing it and looking at sometimes what the activity is that's already happening out there. And that's something that we've seen work really well for Yammer at BP. So what we've done is, rather than go and try and convince the people who are resistors to get on board with it, we've actually focused on the bright spots and the people who love it and who are really into it, and let them go out there and lead by example and demonstrate and bring people along with them. So sometimes I think it's less about setting an agenda and forcing it in terms of an L&D kind of strategy, and more just letting the users use it for what's useful for them. I think that can be helpful.
I've been really interested in this, and it sparked off a few ideas, but it's also sparked off a question about moderation. And I'm just picturing, looking at the kind of darker side, the new starters who are sharing shortcuts. Oh yeah, what you do is you use somebody else's login and all that stuff. And I was just thinking, how do we get the balance of kind of not wanting to step in with size 10s as a moderator and saying, that's wrong, that's bad, and at the same time encouraging people to share? It's just an open question. I'm just kind of exactly where I am at the moment.
Well, you know what my answer's going to be, probably. You're right, you don't want to do the heavy moderation. I think what tends to happen, groups self-moderate. They sort themselves out. Wow. Anyone says anything incorrect or wrong, it pretty much gets sorted out straight away. Any examples you want to share? Because, you're out there in the grass.
Hi, so I'm Kirsty at Linklaters, and the running joke with Yammer in our firm is that it's the longest running pilot. So XCOM and the risk department were really wary of it, because obviously from a client matter perspective and being a law firm, they were just scared that people were going to start posting confidential information. In fact, it's never happened, and some of the senior partners loved it. They said, well, stuff you, I'm going to use it anyway. And pretty much the whole firm's on it, just from word of mouth. So everyone just moderated themselves.
Yes, thank you, yeah.
Down there, corner.
Ooh, nice. Okay, we started talking a lot about some of the challenges around implementation. For a few of us on the table here, some of the decisions have been made before they'd even reached L&D. All of a sudden, we're suddenly finding Yammer or whatever platform's been implemented without our input. And then that asks questions as to whether or not we suddenly have resistance towards it as well. One example was that Yammer had been implemented with all the best intentions of collaboration across an organisation, and there wasn't the will towards it, and eventually what happened was the workforce started to adopt something else, and they created a WhatsApp group and started to communicate through that, and as a starting point, that's great. You've suddenly got people connecting and talking with each other, but it wasn't quite in the way intended. But I mean, that aside, you've got that no sort of clear objective to kind of kick on with, and there's a question as to whether or not people are considering the L&D implications of implementing an enterprise social network. We've also had examples of culture coming in play. A couple of the people on the table are from Norway, work with the police department, and it's a large country. You've got people very, very sort of sporadically spread about, and it's not as easy as just popping over to the next town to go and speak to people. You need these remote networks to be able to communicate. However, there's also red tape rules, bureaucracy around what you can and can't say, and it's much heavier by all accounts than it is over here. Suddenly the freedom to be able to share what you want to gets cut right down, and there's resistance towards using it because you can't say what you want to say, or you feel overexposed, asking questions that in your head you're probably thinking you should know, but you don't have that freedom to be able to ask.
Yeah, and of course that's what drives it all underground, doesn't it? All those big social media policies, and you can't do this, you can't do that, it just drives it underground. And it happens anyway, but it just hasn't happened on the systems that you want it to happen on. So it goes on the WhatsApps and things like that. So there's a balance, isn't there, to get between whoops, attached still, the balance between, helping people use it effectively and within sort of the national culture and the organisational culture, which is, and not being too over heavy-handed about it. It's a balance, and I think you're right. That's where L&D could probably have played a part in helping that, but often it doesn't happen like that. You come to pick up the pieces, don't you?
It does beg a question as to how much sort of analysis goes. Sorry. It does beg a question as to how much analysis goes in beforehand, before even implementing something like this, and whether or not that's been done properly. And again, is it people adopting it because other people are adopting it and it's worked for them, so it's going to work for us, or are we looking at the digital capability of the audience that are going to use it? I know in my organisation where I work, we have a very, very large part of the business that has been there with the same employers for over 30 years. They're in their mid-60s, and they carry a huge amount of risk with them because we can't crack their heads open and get the knowledge out from them. They're not used to working in that way. And so immediately we're starting to think, well, what are the other opportunities and avenues that we've got to be able to try and share some of that, get them collaborating and working with others. It's a big, big challenge for us. You'd be more than welcome to give me any advice on that, please.
And it's going to require thinking in different ways, isn't it? It's not about training courses or anymore. It's kind of how we can get in, support those people in many different ways, and the role's going to change very, very different, be very, very different in terms of, well, in your organisation, every organisation, in terms of how you can support that to happen. And again, I would say to people, no magic answers to all this. There's the answer works for your organisation. We could hear lots of tips, but what might work in one might not work in another. So you've got to kind of like make your way through all those things. You're going to make mistakes along the way, but that's good, isn't it? We learn from our mistakes. And I think you just got to just try and push forward in different ways.
You might also find in that situation, especially when you're talking about kind of different generations of people, and I think I read something recently that, is it by 2020 we'll have 4 different generations of people at work, which is baffling. But in that situation, maybe the reverse mentoring, could work. It could be a good angle, pairing people that have got, years and years of experience with those that are kind of coming in and don't have much experience, but maybe have more technical or social media kind of experience that might benefit. Might be worth a try.
Yes. Norwegian in the room. It's not just bureaucracy, but it's privacy laws, like you said from the lawyers there, that our customers, we create training programs for the immigration authorities. And you can't just take a photograph of a passport, send it to Yammer and ask other people to contribute, is this a fake or not? Because we have to protect the identity of the person in the passport. So it's quite problematic. And we see that our customers or users, they don't want to share anything. They don't want to ask questions in a social network like this. And that's a problem for us. So if anyone has any tips, apart from waiting for the next generation, that would be good.
That generation is already here, so,
Okay, any more questions? Yes? Negotiate my way through the mails.
Hi, I just have a quick question. In your experience, have you formally embedded the use of ESN in the other levers of reward recognition and performance management? Because what I struggle with sometimes is that we use intrinsic motivation for this to sort of stay alive, but there's a point where you need something more to incentivize people to use it. So I'm just curious to hear if anybody has embedded them in the reward recognition and performance management processes.
I haven't, I'm afraid. I don't know if anyone else in the room has any experience.
I have a view on that. I don't think that you should, People will see value, they'll go and use it, which is the way you want it to be. You want people to go there because they use it. And I think we worry a bit too much when I hear implementation. You don't have all your friends and implement a social network with your friends and see if it works. People go there because they see great value, and it's amazing to use. Stuff stays on there. It's just valuable. So, I worry less about getting people to go there then I thought it was a great comment earlier about using your enthusiasts, using people that care about it. If there's 500 groups, brilliant. I hope there's 1,000 groups. It doesn't matter if there's 2 people in a group. If they're getting use out of it, what have you lost by having an extra group? I'd like to see 10,000 groups in a company, because that means there's 10,000 groups of people that care enough to create a group and share stuff. So, you know, I wouldn't be worried about driving people to do it with performance management. Get them to go there because they want to.
Great, well,
I think what you want to see is how it's improved performance. That's the thing, really, isn't it? You know, what people value they're getting out of it and what difference it's made to their job ultimately. And that's really what we're looking for. It's not something to support and improve their jobs.
Yeah, I think the thing that's come out of all this is that it's very much still a voyage of discovery, isn't it? And well, this time next year, you can all come back and tell us what you did. So, is there any last burning question for either of these ladies? You all hopefully had found that really interesting. I certainly did. And thank you very much to both of you for engaging us in that little particular journey of yours. And we'll break now for coffee and start again at 22 and enjoy the rest of your conference.